We're going to talk about two different models of personality traits today. We're going to talk about the MBTI, and I'll explain to you why the MBTI is absolutely awful. And then we'll talk about the Big Five, which is the most popular and well supported models of personality. And it's okay. It's not great. It's okay. The MBTI is awful, but it's very popular, and that's why we're talking about it today. This test has basically no usefulness or value, and the only reason that I spend class time talking about it is because so many students have taken it, so many students find value in it, which I will discuss. And so I want to talk about it to debunk the MBTI specifically, but also because the MBTI is really representative of a lot of problems that we see in different personality assessments or different personality models. It's like a role model of bad personality tests. Before we get into why the MBTI is so bad, let's talk about what it measures or purports to measure. The MBTI defines you along four different dimensions. The first dimension is how we get our energy, and there are introverts who get energy from being by themselves, and extroverts who get energy from being around other people. The next dimension is what type of information we prefer. There are people that are sensors, they're sensing, and so they prefer information from the outside world. They prefer things that they can touch and taste and smell and see. Intuition is when you prefer information from internal information, so your gut feeling, your reasoning, your logic. The next dimension is how we make decisions. Thinking is one way of making decisions, and that's people who prioritize the objective outcomes of a decision. And then there's feeling, and that is people that prioritize the emotional outcomes of a decision. And then finally, we have how we organize our world. There's judging, which is when you like a very structured, predictable, scheduled world. And there's perceiving, which is when you prefer flexibility and spontaneity in your day-to-day life. So there's four dimensions, and you can be on either side of each of these dimensions, and then you get a combination of letters that express that. So you might be like an ISTJ or an ESFP or whatever it is. And that is the idea of the MBTI, or the Myers-Briggs type inventory. So the MBTI is an awful, awful test, and I'll tell you why. The first reason that the MBTI is an awful test is because it is unreliable. There's a 50% chance that if you take the test again 6 months from now, then one of your categories will change. And we just talked about the fact that the whole point of traits, the definition of a trait, is it is consistent across time. So if your personality is changing every 6 months, then what you're measuring is probably not a trait. Think about this like your bathroom scale. If you get on your bathroom scale and it tells you you weigh 100 pounds and you go, oh, that seems wrong. And so you get off and you step back on it, and now it says you weigh 200 pounds. You're not going to believe that scale, right? You're getting such vastly different answers every time you take it that you have to call into question whether the results are actually meaningful at all. And this is the problem that we see with the MBTI, is that people, when they take it over and over again, they get vastly different results. One of the main reasons for this is because the MBTI describes traits as binary. You are either introverted or you are extroverted. There is no in between. There is no gray area. You have to fit into one of these boxes. And what happens is people will take the MBTI and they'll score slightly introverted, but the MBTI doesn't have a slightly introverted category, so you just get thrown in with all the other hardcore introverts. And then you take it again 6 months later, and you score slightly extroverted. But again, there's no slightly extroverted, so you just get tossed into the category with all the hardcore extroverts. And your score has changed very little. You may have gone from 49 to 51 on the introversion extroversion scale, but the MBTI does not allow for gray areas. It has to put you into this big box of either introverted or extroverted, whereas most of us are not that extreme, and so it's putting these false categories on us, which a slight change in us over time can create a big change in these categories. So if a test is good, it can predict something meaningful. IQ tests predict how well you're going to do in school. They predict how well you perform at work. They even predict how long you are going to live. More intelligent people live longer than less intelligent people. Those are important, meaningful, useful outcomes. A good model, like the model of intelligence, can predict something meaningful. So what can the MBTI predict? Well, if you go to the MBTI website, they're going to tell you that it predicts things like what jobs you're going to be good at, what jobs you're going to be happy at, and who you're going to work well with. The MBTI has done research on this for over 40 years, and they find that their test that you have to buy and get scored from them, or one of their licensed facilitators, is really good at predicting what job you're going to like and how well you're going to be at it and who you're going to work well with. They are the only institution in the world that has found any support for that claim. There's been over 40 years of research on the MBTI within the field of psychology, looking at, hey, what does it predict? And the answer is a resounding nothing. Independent, intelligent, very thoughtful scientists have tested the claims of the MBTI that it predicts what job you're going to like, what job you're going to be good at, and who you're going to work well with, and they have found no evidence to support that. So at the end of the day, the MBTI is just snake oil. You're probably wondering, if the MBTI is so bad, so obviously bad, then why is it so popular? You may have taken the MBTI at work. You may have taken the MBTI within this MBA program. Why do people continue to use it if it is so obviously bad? There are a lot of reasons for this, but let's talk about one of the main ones. I just had you read this paragraph and ask you how well you think this describes you. So let's take a step back and talk about where this paragraph comes from. When I started teaching about the MBTI and what a bad test it was, I got a lot of negative pushback from students. Students who told me that, maybe the MBTI was not accurate in general, but that it was really accurate for them, that it gave them a lot of self-insight, that it described them perfectly and who they work with perfectly. And they would not accept that the MBTI is not a valuable or useful test. And so I came up with a way to prove my point. And what I did was I told all my students that I was going to write a psychoanalytic summary of their personality based on the interactions that I had with them in class, and the work that they had turned in, their grades, everything else. I told them I was going to write up this little psychoanalysis of them and share it with them. And I told them, hey, these are really personal. Please don't share these with any of the other students in class. They're all really personal. And I asked them how accurate my description was. Now, as you can probably guess, I sent out the exact same description to every single person in class. And what kind of results did I get? These aren't actual results, but just a graphical display of what my results would look like basically every semester. I might get a couple students that were like, oh, this is really inaccurate, but the vast majority of students would rate that paragraph that you just read, that description, as either accurate or very accurate. And I would get emails sent back to me like, oh, wow, you're like a magical wizard who can read my soul. And in fact, that's why I had to quit doing that exercise, because when I told students that I had used the same one for everyone, when I told students that I had essentially tricked them, they got really upset. So I decided to quit doing that. I like to have a trusting classroom environment. I don't want you guys to feel like I'm trying to trick you. So what's going on here? Why do people believe that paragraph that I wrote, or I didn't write it, but why do people believe that paragraph that I used to send them? Why do people believe the MBTI when it is so obviously wrong? Again, there are a lot of reasons. We don't have time to go into all of them, but one of the big ones is something called the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect, named after P.T. Barnum, the guy that started the circus and had history working with fortune tellers and psychics and that type of thing. The Barnum effect is the idea that people are willing to believe vague, complimentary descriptions of themselves. So if you tell someone something vague and something nice, then they will believe it. And that's what's going on here with the paragraph that I sent out to students. The paragraph doesn't describe any one person. It describes what people are like in general. So the very first line of the paragraph is, you have a strong desire to be liked and admired. Yeah, that's not unique to you. That's part of being a human being. That's like saying, you have two arms and two legs and a head of hair. That's not true of everyone, but it's a pretty good guess. What else we got? Oh, at times you're extroverted, affable, and social, while at other times you're introverted, wary, and reserved. That is true of every person. Everyone likes to be alone and by themselves sometimes, and everyone likes to be social and hanging out sometimes. So the first way the Barnum effect works is to give people a vague description. The other thing about the Barnum effect is that people like to be complimented. So the paragraph that I sent out was mildly positive, right? So it says things like, well, you have some personality weaknesses. You are generally able to compensate for them. Oh yeah, you have some weaknesses, but don't worry, you're doing really well. And the one I love the most is, you pride yourself as an independent thinker and do not accept others' statements without satisfactory proof, which is hilarious because, of course, this is a statement that you're accepting without satisfactory proof. But you read that and you're like, yeah, I am an independent thinker. That's a good point, paragraph. So the exact same thing that's going on with the Barnum effect, that paragraph that I showed you, is the exact same thing that's going on with the MBTI. Go back and read your MBTI and see how much of it is, first of all, positive and complimentary, how much of it is them buttering you up, number one, and then number two, how much of your description could apply to basically any human being in the world. That's how the MBTI works. That's how horoscopes work. That's how fortune tellers work. It's vague and complimentary. The reason I'm harping on this so much is because I just want you to be cautious, because there are a lot of really bad tests out there. The Big Five inventory, which I give to my students, is freely available online. The questions and the scoring key, you can download them online for free. It is a very well supported, valid, reliable test of personality. If I am a consulting firm and I want to make money, I can't make money selling something that is already freely available. I have to come up with my own theory of personality, my own personality test, and I can copyright that, and I can charge people to give them that test and to analyze it. And so this is why every single company has their own different personality test, is because they're making them up because they have to have something to charge. If they just use the ones that have been that have a lot of scientific evidence behind them, that are freely available, it's harder to charge money for something that you can get for free. And you have to be really cautious about believing the results of these personality tests, because once people put a label on you, or once you put a label on yourself, we tend to fulfill that label. My father always told me I wasn't very athletic. My dad's not very athletic, and so he always told me that I wasn't athletic. And not in like a mean or critical way. Just whenever I struggle with sports, he'd be like, "Oh, don't worry about it. You're a Kavanaugh, and Kavanaughs aren't athletic." And from a very young age. And so that's something I completely internalized about myself, and I never even tried to play sports. And when I played sports, I never really put effort into getting better at them, because it just seemed like something that was out of reach. It didn't matter how much time and effort I put into it, I wouldn't get better. When I got older, I got into rock climbing, and I really enjoyed rock climbing just for the joy of it. I wasn't trying to get really good at it. But hey, as I put time and effort into it, guess what? I got better and better and better at it. And it wasn't that I was this completely unathletic person that was incapable of learning. It was that I believed I was incapable of learning, so I didn't even try. And I'm sure there is something in your life that someone has told you, or you've told yourself something, that you're not good at math, you're not good at writing, whatever it is, and you believe that. And because you believe it, you avoid those opportunities, those situations where you actually learn that skill. So you have to be very cautious of any test that's going to put a label on you. And also just beware of any test claiming to tell you who you are. We are so skeptical about feedback from other people, but we spend 20 minutes filling out a multiple choice test and we think it's like this deep insight into our soul, right? Um, you are an incredibly complex person. The people who know you the best are you, your family, your coworkers. They're the ones who can give you deep insight into who you are. A 20-minute multiple choice test cannot reveal your soul to you. Lastly, be very skeptical of any personality test that puts you into a category, like the MBTI does, where the MBTI says you're either an introvert or an extrovert, or there's personality tests that assign you a color, right? You're like a blue, you're an orange, you're an owl, you're an eagle, you're a peony, you're an orchid, whatever it is. Human beings are incredibly complex. We cannot be simplified into categories in very easy ways. And so that's a red flag. And that's not to say that there aren't any good personality tests that put you into categories, but in general, that is a red flag of an indication that it probably isn't a very good personality test or theory of personality.